This video is a tutorial on the preterite tense in Spanish. The preterite tense is arguably the most important past tense, the most common one, especially at GCSE. So it's definitely a good one to learn off by heart. Just to recap the three main types of past tenses that we study at GCSE, the preterite tense is used to talk about a completed action in the past, specifically in a past time frame. For example, los jóvenes visitaron España el año pasado. The young people visited Spain last year. Here we're talking about an action that's finished, it's completed, it happened last year. Last year is a past time period, it's no longer happening. So for this example, you would definitely want the verb to be in the preterite tense. If we compare that to the perfect tense, which I've also got a tutorial video on, that's not as common because it's used to talk about something that's happened in an ongoing time period. So for example, los jóvenes han visitado España esta semana. The young people have visited Spain this week. So in this example, we translate the verbs as have or has done something, so have visited. And the key here, esta semana, this week, is talking about an ongoing time period that hasn't finished yet. So that's why we're more likely to use the perfect tense in this example rather than the preterite. And the other example of a past tense is the imperfect tense, which we use more to talk about things that used to happen when you were younger, or a continuous action or something that happened repeatedly in the past. So for example, los jóvenes visitaban España todos los años. The young people used to visit or were visiting Spain every year. So that's a continuous and ongoing thing that always happened every year. But as I said, the preterite is probably the most important one to learn. So this tutorial is only going to look at preterite tense. So let's firstly talk about how to form the preterite tense. There are 3 steps. The first thing that you need whenever you're doing any sort of verb conjugations, putting a verb into a tense, is to find the basic form of the verb. That is the infinitive form, and it will always end in AR, ER or IR. If you look up the verb in the dictionary, it will give you the infinitive form. So for example, beber, the verb to drink, which is a regular ER verb. Next thing we need to do, step 2, is take off our ending, the AR, ER or IR part. So if we take off the ER of beber, we get beb. So this is the stem, and we're going to build our preterite tense onto the stem of the verb. And step 3 is to put the correct endings on. So in the case of beber, the preterite tense endings would be bebí, I drank, bebiste, you singular drank, bebió, he drank or she drank or it drank, bebimos, we drank, bebisteis, you plural drank, and bebieron, they drank. So if we have a little look at the summary of how to form preterite tense with regular verbs, here you've got the AR regular verbs in red. So for example, hablar, the verb to speak, would be hablé, I spoke, hablaste, you spoke, habló, he or she spoke, hablamos, we spoke, hablasteis, you plural spoke, hablaron, they spoke. In blue, you've got your regular ER verbs, which would be the same as beber. So in this example, the verb to eat, comer, would be comí, I ate, comiste, you singular ate, comió, he or she ate, comimos, we ate, comisteis, you plural ate, comieron, they ate. And then the regular IR verbs, for example, vivir, the verb to live, would change to viví, I lived, viviste, you lived, vivió, he or she lived, vivimos, we lived, vivisteis, you plural lived, vivieron, they lived. Now, when you're learning tenses and verb patterns, it's really important to look for similarities and differences, as this will help you with your learning off by heart. So the main things I would say to notice here are the ER and the IR verb pattern in the preterite is exactly the same. So if you've learnt the ER verb endings, you only need to learn those because the IR is the same. And another thing that's really important to notice is to be really careful with the AR verb endings, especially remembering to put your accents on, because that can totally change the meaning of what you're talking about. And I've written this out here as an important thing to remember. So ER and IR verb endings are the same in the preterite tense, so that's great. You only need to learn one set there. The verb in the AR verbs, amos, so the we verb ending, is actually the same in the present and in the preterite tense. So if we compare our present tense hablar with our preterite tense hablar, you'll notice the we form is the same. So if you say hablamos, it can mean we speak, we are speaking in the present, but it can also mean we spoke in the past. So just something to watch out for. Usually from the context, it's quite obvious which tense the speaker wants to use. And the other thing that we need to be aware of is the use of accents to differentiate between habló, which is I speak, and habló, which is he or she spoke in the past. So if we compare our present and our preterite tense of AR verbs again, you'll notice that the I speak or I am speaking in the present tense is spelled hablo with no accent on the O. But then if we look at our preterite tense for he or she spoke in the past, you've got habló with an accent on the O. So the accent firstly changes how we pronounce the word, puts the stress on the end syllable, habló, and also in this case changes the meaning. So you do need to be aware that just that little accent can make a big difference. So be careful. If you are talking about yourself in the present, you don't need the accent, habló. And if you're talking about somebody else, he or she did something in the past, you do need the accent, habló. So be careful with that little accent there. And this is just a little summary of some of the most common regular verbs in preterite tense. Most verbs in Spanish tend to be AR verbs, which is why the left-hand column is longer. So these are the ones that I would make sure you know the meanings of, make sure you feel comfortable taking off the AR and putting your new endings on. And the ER in the middle and the IR at the end would have the same endings as each other. So that's just a little summary to help you with some common verbs. So all of those verbs in that table would follow the pattern of regular AR, ER and IR verb endings. Now, unfortunately, as you know, there are lots of verbs that are irregular in Spanish, and the preterite tense is no exception. So I've listed the most important irregular verbs on this tutorial. There are a lot of them. I don't think you need to learn them all at GCSE. You will if you're going to do A-level. But the most important ones to focus on, if you're going to learn just a few, I would say, are the three on this page. So ir, to go, and ser, to be, which is used for more permanent characteristics. These two verbs actually have the same irregular verb pattern in the preterite. So fui can mean I went, or it can mean I was. And fuiste can mean you went or you were. Fue can mean he went, she went, or it can mean he was, she was. And another verb that I would say is very important to learn is hacer, the verb to do or to make. And it's really quite a straightforward pattern to learn. It's really, most of the irregular preterites have the same kind of ending pattern. They all seem to follow what hacer is doing with the iste, or, imos, istes, hieron. It's usually the stem where you'll see more of an irregular pattern. So in this case, the HAC has changed to HIC, apart from the he or she, which has got its own thing going on. It has a Z in there. But that's quite an important one to learn. So if you wanted to say, I did my homework, it would be hice mis deberes. She did her homework, hizo sus deberes, etc. And then on the bottom row, you've got some other irregular verbs in the preterite. I'd say the most important one on that row would be poder, the verb to be able, which also can translate as can. So I could, you, I was able, you were able, etc. So that's a really important one to learn. But again, if you look at the ending of the verb iste, o, imos, istes, hieron is the same as hacer. So you'll notice a lot of the irregular pattern it will be the same in terms of if you learn one irregular preterite, a lot of them will have a similar pattern, and it becomes easier and easier to learn them as you go. And in this case, we're just changing our stem slightly from pod to pud. So it's not super different. I'll just quickly go through the meanings of the other preterites on here in case you want to look at them. So at the top in the middle, you've got dar, the verb to give. So it would be I gave, you gave, he gave, etc. And on the bottom row, andar, the verb to walk. So anduve, I walked. Estar is another verb meaning to be, but we only really use it for location and mood and feelings. And then poner at the end is to put. And then the second page of irregulars, again, I wouldn't worry about learning all of them, but the three that I have circled there are probably the most useful. So querer, to want, and this again has that same pattern at the end, iste o, imos iste hicieron, as you'll see most of them have that pattern, but your stem has changed from quer to quis, so Q-U-I-S is kind of the main thing you need to learn. So quise, I wanted, quisiste, you wanted, quiso, he or she or it wanted, etc. Saber is the verb to know, as in knowing facts or information. It's probably not that common in the preterite at GCSE. I wouldn't worry about learning it. It might be useful to recognise it because the sab changing to soup is quite weird, so it doesn't really look like the infinitive. So maybe just worth being able to recognise that one. Tener is a really important one, so I would definitely try and learn this. The verb to have, of course. Tuve, I had. Tuviste, you had. Tuvo, he or she had. If you're struggling with learning the whole pattern, you could just focus on learning the I and the we forms, because it's, you're usually going to be telling a story or talking about yourself, or you and your friends, or you and your family. So the I form, I had, tuve, and the we form, tuvimos, we had, are probably the most important two to learn if you're struggling with learning all six. And the next one, venir, to come. So vine, I came, viniste, you came, vino, he or she or it came, etc. Again, it is an important verb, but you can kind of get away with not needing to use it that much at GCSE. So I think just being able to recognise it. Be careful with vino, because obviously vino is also a noun meaning wine. So from the context, you'll know if they're talking about wine or if they're talking about somebody coming somewhere. But just be aware that can be the verb venir, or it can be a noun meaning wine, to drink. And then on the bottom row, you've got some slightly different patterns here, because you've got a J running throughout. You've still got that common ending of iste or imos istes, but the ieron has changed to eron, so it hasn't got the I before the E in the final they form. So that's the only thing that's slightly different about these ones. I've put them in a row on their own because all these verbs have got a J in the stem, which makes them quite irregular. So just to run through, traer is the verb to bring. So traje, I brought. Again, you're probably not going to need to know it, but it might be a good one to recognise. Conducir, to drive. Conduje, I drove, etc. Decir is probably the most important one on that row. It's the verb to say or to tell something. So if you're telling a story, it might be quite a nice one to be able to use dije, I said, or dijo, he said, she said, or dijimos, we said. And again, it's quite a weird one because the DEC changing to DIJ is quite strange. So definitely one that I would try and perhaps learn, even if you just learn it in the I said form. Producir is to produce and traducir is to translate, but again, you're probably not going to need to know those two as much. So it's quite a comprehensive list, but just focus on the ones that I've circled in green. Okay, time to do some practicing now. So you can pause the video, wind back, look at the notes, or use your resources to help you with this. It's just some conjugation practice. So I'm going to go through the answers now. So pause if you want to pause before and have a go at the exercise first. Question 1. Ella y yo vivimos en Alemania. So this one always catches people out because ella y yo, people think, oh, it's yo, so I'm going to put it in the I lived form, but it's not. It's she and I. So she and I together make we. So we lived in Germany. So you need the IR ending of a regular preterite verb. So vivimos. Question 2. Vosotros cantasteis juntos. So that's a regular AR verb meaning to sing. So take your AR off, put your asteis on, and it means you plural sang together. Question 3. Ella comió la fruta. So again, another regular ER verb in the she form. She ate the fruit. Question 4. Ellos bebieron la limonada. So very similar to number 3, but it's they, not she. So they drank the lemonade using an ER verb ending. Question 5. Now this is a question, but it doesn't matter. You just carry on as normal. So the question marks just are telling you to kind of raise your voice as you say it. ¿Tú hablaste con ella? Did you speak to her? When we translate a question into English, we actually structure it quite differently to Spanish. In Spanish, they just say, you spoke with her. And it's a lot more straightforward to make a question in Spanish. In English, we have to put the auxiliary verb did or do or does. So it's a bit trickier to do a question in English. And number 6 is another regular verb. Escribir means to write, so just use your normal IR verb endings. Yo escribí una carta. I wrote a letter. And number 7, I've put these last 4 in red because they are irregular, so you may want to go back and check your irregular verb patterns if you've not learnt them. So, nosotros fuimos a Grecia el año pasado. We went to Greece last year. Los jóvenes, number 8, los jóvenes tuvieron una fiesta ayer. So from the verb tener, to have, again an irregular one. Tuvieron, they had a party yesterday. Question 9. Mi amigo hizo un aprendizaje. So again, hacer is an irregular verb. My friend did an apprenticeship. And number 10, las chicas quisieron viajar por el mundo. The girls wanted to travel all over the world. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions or if you want me to clarify anything, and good luck with your preterite tense revision.